Welcome to True Echo, where powerful stories leave lasting echoes. Today's story is one you'll never forget. It begins in a crowded train station with a single note from a forgotten man, and ends with a revelation that silences the world. If you've ever felt broken, invisible, or lost in silence, this story is for you. So pause what you're doing, turn up the volume, and witness the moment a billionaire in disguise redefined redemption, legacy, and what it truly means to come home. Now let's begin. The sound of rolling suitcases, clipped announcements, and clacking heels echoed through the central concourse of Grand Central Station. People moved with their usual purpose, late for something, checking schedules, scrolling through phones. The world spun forward with caffeine-fueled speed. And no one noticed the man sitting at the piano bench near track 21. Julian Hart looked like any other drifter. His trench coat hung off his frame like a curtain too heavy for its rod. His scarf was tucked neatly, but it had the look of something once expensive, now softened by years of travel. His gloves were fingerless, not for style but wear. His beard, peppered with gray, was trimmed only enough to suggest a man who still respected himself but no longer fought to be seen. The piano, a slightly battered upright placed in the terminal as part of the city's arts initiative, sat unused for most of the day. Few dared to try. Fewer still could hold attention. But Julian, he didn't seem to want attention. His fingers rested quietly on his lap, long and thin, twitching with a nervous rhythm. He was lost in something deeper than thought, memory, perhaps. A memory no one around him could guess. Then came the voice. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to vacate the piano bench." The guard wore the kind of uniform that came with a name tag and a clipboard, but wielded like a badge of authority. He didn't speak with curiosity or concern, only command. The kind of voice that cut corners and didn't wait for reply. Julian didn't look up at first. He had heard the words but let them float, the way one might hear wind moving through trees, present, but not urgent. "I said, this piano's for performers, not loiterers." Still no response. The man's foot tapped impatiently. A few passers-by slowed their steps. A mother pulling her daughter paused, frowning. A group of teens, skateboards slung over their shoulders, chuckled. "Old guy thinks he's Beethoven," one of them muttered. Julian finally looked up. His eyes, a shade of gray that called to mind smoke on water, met the guards. They weren't defiant. They weren't apologetic either. Just calm. Centered. "I'll only be a moment," Julian said quietly. "Not how it works, sir," the guard replied. "We have rules. Professional artists only." "I understand." The man's hands began to rise slowly, reaching toward the piano's lid. But before he could even touch the keys, a voice cut through. "He's with me." It wasn't loud, but it carried. Sharp, clear, with the kind of conviction that made people turn. A girl no older than 17 stepped forward. Her violin case hung from her shoulder like a badge of honor, worn at the edges. Her hair was a chaotic halo of curls, and her coat looked like it had once belonged to someone much larger. But her presence filled the space like someone used to earning silence. The guard blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said," the girl repeated, stepping between Julian and the guard, "he's with me. I'm playing. He's accompanying." The security officer narrowed his eyes. "Do you have authorization?" "We only need one permit per act," she replied evenly. "That's the rule. We're one act. One song." There was a stillness then, brief but heavy. The kind of moment where decisions matter more than they should. Julian looked at her, confused. They hadn't spoken. He had never seen her before. "Why?" he asked under his breath. She turned to him with a small smile. "Because you look like someone who has something to say. And I want to hear it." It wasn't kindness. It was something else. Reverence. The guard hesitated. Then, perhaps realizing the eyes on him had multiplied, he shrugged. One song. He walked off, muttering. But the bench remained. Julian stared at the girl. "You don't know me." "No," she said simply. "But I know music. And I know that sometimes it chooses people before they even know they've been chosen." She opened her case, but didn't remove her violin. Just stood there, waiting. Julian's hands hovered over the keys. They hadn't touched an instrument in years. Not since Claire. Not since the hospital. Not since the day the music stopped feeling like life and started sounding like memory. But now, here, something stirred. He lifted the lid. The piano was chipped in places. A few keys slightly yellowed. The middle C bore a faint lipstick smudge. Someone had once played here with joy. He touched a single note. G. It rang out, not loudly, but clearly. Pure. Whole. People nearby froze. A woman holding a latte paused mid-sip. A businessman lowered his phone. The skaters stopped whispering. The station had not gone silent, but the air inside it had shifted. It was no longer filled with noise. It was filled with attention. Julian's hands trembled. That note had echoed through his bones like a name he hadn't heard in years. Claire. The one who used to hum behind him as he composed. The one who filled silence with song and made even bad notes feel like part of the plan. She had died with a song on her lips. And Julian had stopped playing ever since. But now, another note. Then another. It wasn't a song, not yet. Just fragments. Sounds of a man remembering how to feel. His hands moved slow at first, then faster. Hesitant, then sure. The melody was not rehearsed. It was not perfect. But it was real. It came from a place deeper than technique, grief. Grief turned to shape. Shape turned to music. Elena, the girl, didn't raise her violin. She simply watched, heart in her throat, knowing something sacred was happening. Not just in him. In the space. In the crowd. In her. And Julian, he didn't stop. Because somewhere in that swirling chaos of keys and memory, he remembered something she once said. If you ever forget why you play, just find one person who needs to hear it. He looked up briefly. And there she was. Listening. Julian didn't notice the tears at first, his own or anyone else's. But Elena saw them. The moisture caught in the corners of his eyes, the trembling of his lower lip as his hands, those elegant, aching hands, continued to move over the chipped keys. The song he was playing didn't exist in any book. It was born in real time, unfolding from the wreckage of years lost, from a silence that had been too loud for too long. And the station? It listened. For a moment, Grand Central wasn't a train station. It was a chapel. The melody shifted, now slower, reflective, as though Julian were walking back through memories, retracing steps he'd once abandoned. Notes staggered briefly, and his right hand faltered. Elena saw it instantly. She didn't hesitate. Her bow rose, gently gliding across the strings of her violin, and she matched him. Not in tempo or volume, those didn't matter. She matched him in intention. She followed the cracks, supported the uncertain chords, stitched the silence with warm harmonies. Julian didn't glance at her. He didn't need to. Her presence beside him was like breathing. They weren't performing. They were communicating in the language of sorrow and solace, grief and grace. They were telling a story that needed no words. The crowd grew. More phones appeared, but not in mockery. Not for spectacle. For reverence. And among the crowd, a woman with tightly braided hair and a medical badge clipped to her coat froze mid-stride. Her coffee cup hit the floor without her noticing. She placed a hand over her chest. "I know that melody," she whispered. She didn't know Julian Hart. She didn't recognize his face. But the music, that lived in her memory. Somewhere between her childhood and her mother's lullabies. Another man, mid-60s, a veteran judging by the cap, stood straighter, eyes moist. He turned to no one in particular and said, I heard this once. Carnegie Hall, '02. I swear that's him. It has to be. Julian kept playing. He wasn't aware of the crowd. He wasn't playing for them. He was playing for her. Claire. The love he buried in silence. The voice that once filled their apartment with laughter and song. The ghost that lived inside every unplayed note for the last 20 years. And somewhere, between a minor seventh and a gentle glissando, the music changed. Not just in tone. In purpose. It became lighter. Not happy, but hopeful. Like sunrise creeping across a cold floor. Elena felt it. Her bow moved with fresh energy, mirroring the lift in his spirit. They leaned into each other musically, one catching what the other released. They weren't two instruments anymore. They were one. When the final note came, it wasn't loud. It was soft, a whisper. A goodbye, maybe. Or a welcome back. The station didn't erupt into applause at first. It inhaled. Held the breath. And then, as if released from a spell, the crowd applauded, not politely, but desperately. Like they'd just witnessed something they'd never see again. Like something ancient had returned, if only for a moment. Julian sat back. His fingers hovered above the keys. He didn't move. Elena gently rested her bow. You okay? She whispered. Julian nodded once, slowly. I didn't think I'd remember how. You didn't forget, she replied. You were just waiting for the right listener. That's when the murmurs began. From the back of the crowd, a young man held up his phone. That's him, he whispered to his friend. Julian Hart. The pianist who disappeared. Someone else gasped. The billionaire. The one who left everything. Phones started snapping photos. Google searches flew. Rumors raced ahead of the truth. And Julian finally looked up, eyes wide, not with fear, but with acceptance. He stood. The bench creaked one last time under his weight. But before he could speak, the security guard reappeared. The same man who had tried to dismiss him now looked pale, shaken. I didn't know, the guard said. Sir, I had no idea. Julian held up a hand. It's all right. No, I mean. I thought you were just some guy. I am, Julian said softly. I'm just a guy who hadn't played in a while. The crowd parted as he moved through them. No applause followed him. Just silence. Not the kind of silence that erases, but the kind that honors. Julian didn't stay to answer questions. He didn't wave or bow. He whispered something to Elena. She nodded, and he vanished into the crowd the way he had come, quietly, without fanfare, like a ghost returning to its home after delivering a message. Elena stayed behind, still seated on the bench. Her violin in her lap, her pulse still catching up. People came up to her. Some asked who he was. Some just stood nearby, unsure why they were crying. And one woman, elderly, eyes red, stepped forward, whispering, that melody, my mother used to hum that while cleaning. She said a man wrote it for her. She never told me his name. Elena's heart froze. Her grandmother. Margot Delaney. She used to hum that same tune. Elena never questioned it, just thought it was hers. But now it had a name. A beginning. A composer. Julian Hart. And suddenly, Elena realized, this wasn't a coincidence. This was a thread. A story too long untold. A legacy she was a part of before she ever touched a violin. She pulled out her phone, checked her recording. The comments were already flooding in. "This man saved my life today. Who is he? I felt every note. Is that Julian Hart? Please, someone confirm." Then one comment made her chest tighten. "That melody, my grandmother called it Autumn's Memory. Said it was written by the kindest man she ever knew." Elena swallowed hard. She had to find him. Not because of the fame. But because of the music. And the truth buried inside it. The train station emptied slowly after Julian's disappearance, but the echo of his music lingered. Elena remained seated on the bench, still processing the weight of what had just unfolded. The world had seen a man reborn. But for Elena, it was something even deeper. It was a thread pulled straight through her past, unraveling everything she thought she knew. She clutched her phone, heart racing. The recording had gone live. In less than an hour, it was already being shared across forums, music pages, even local news sites. But Elena wasn't watching for views. She was reading the comments. Dozens of them referenced the same thing, Autumn's Memory. The melody. The name her grandmother Margot had whispered so many nights while folding laundry or mending costumes at the community art school. Elena's fingers trembled as she tapped her mother's number into her phone. "Sweetheart," her mother answered, a little breathless. "Is everything okay?" "Mom," Elena said, standing now, pacing beside the piano, "do you remember the song Grandma used to hum all the time? The one that always made her cry?" "Of course," her mother replied gently. "She called it Autumn's Memory." "Why?" Elena took a breath. "Do you know where she learned it?" There was a pause on the line. A long one. "She used to say," her mom finally said, "that a man wrote it for her. A friend. Someone she met at the school. He helped her once. I don't know, Elena. She never told me his name. Just said it was a gift." Elena's chest tightened. "What if I told you I just heard it?" she whispered. Her mother's voice sharpened. "What do you mean?" "I just played with a man at the station. He played it, every single note. And, Mom, it was him. It had to be him." "Elena," her mother said, now barely a breath, "where are you?" "Grand Central." "But he's gone now. He left." Elena ended the call and dug through her violin case. At the bottom, wedged beneath spare strings and a tuning fork, was her grandmother's old music notebook. A soft red cloth-bound book with frayed edges and hand-drawn clefs in the margins. She flipped through the pages. Scales, lesson notes, scribbles in pencil. And there, tucked between two sheets, was a photo. Black and white. Slightly creased. A man at a grand piano, head bowed, hands poised. He wasn't looking at the camera. But Elena knew. It was him. Julian Hart. She stared at the image, her throat dry, eyes burning. Her grandmother had kept this photo. Hidden it. Protected it. He wasn't just a stranger who played her song. He was the origin. The beginning of Elena's love for music, she just hadn't known it until now. Suddenly she was moving, fast. Through the terminal, past lingering passengers and snack vendors. She scanned every bench, every hallway, every exit. Nothing. He was gone. But he couldn't be far. She darted toward the west platform. The 4:15 to Boston was boarding. She scanned the line. Not there. She checked the escalators, the waiting areas, even the coffee shop tucked behind track 14. Then she saw him. Not seated. Not in the open. Standing quietly near a column beside the cafe. Half in shadow, sipping from a paper cup, watching a little boy now plunking joyfully at the piano keys. The same bench Julian had just left behind. Elena slowed, caught her breath, then approached. "You left," she said. He didn't turn. "I always leave." "Not this time." Julian looked at her now. His expression unreadable. She held up the photo. "My grandmother was Margot Delaney." His face shifted. Softened. A name returned from the grave. "She used to hum that song," Elena said. "Said someone gave it to her. Someone who saved the school." Julian looked down at his cup. "I didn't save anything. I just stopped it from collapsing for a little while." "She kept your photo." He didn't speak. "She taught me to play," Elena added. She said, "Listen before you perform." "Always." I never understood what she meant. "Not until today." He nodded slowly. "She was the only person who ever told me to stop trying to be impressive, and just be honest." "You were honest today," Elena said. "That music? It broke something open. Not just in me. In everyone." Julian stared back toward the piano where the child was still playing, each note clumsy but free. "Music doesn't ask for credentials," he murmured. "It just asks for truth." Elena stepped closer. "Come back with me." He blinked. "Why?" "Because there's more music in you," she said. "Because this can't be the end. Because the world still needs what you carry." Julian looked away. "The world didn't even notice when I left." "That's not true," she said. "I noticed. And so did your music. It's been waiting." He looked at her again. Long, searching. And in that look, he saw something. Not admiration. Not flattery. Recognition. A connection sown not by fame, but by shared melody. He nodded once. And together, they walked back through the station, not toward applause, not toward spotlight, but toward something deeper. Toward legacy. Toward healing. Julian followed Elena out of the station and into the hum of the city like a man waking from a long sleep. The air had a sharp edge, the kind that made your lungs sting if you breathed too deep, but he welcomed it. It reminded him he was alive. Elena didn't say much on the walk. She didn't need to. There was something sacred in silence after music like that. She simply led him down a few streets, cutting through alleyways and past rusted gates, until they stopped in front of a small brick building with stained glass windows. A church. Or rather, it had once been. Now, the signage read, "The Hart School for the Musical Arts." Julian stopped in his tracks. "You kept it," he whispered. Elena turned to him, surprised. "You know this place?" He stepped forward, slowly, like a man remembering how to walk through a memory without breaking it. "I bought this building 20 years ago. Renovated it. Meant to turn it into a scholarship-funded conservatory for underprivileged kids. I named it after my father." She blinked. You started this school?" He nodded faintly. "I funded it. Anonymously. Set it up, hired a team, but I never stayed. I disappeared before the doors opened." Elena looked at the school as if seeing it for the first time. "No one ever told us where the funding came from. We just knew it was a gift. The story was that someone out there believed music should belong to everyone." Julian chuckled softly. "I guess I believed that more than I believed I deserved to see it happen." She touched his arm. "You deserve to see it now." Inside, the halls were lined with hand-painted murals, each one depicting a different instrument, a different child. The air smelled faintly of lemon oil and old books. In one corner, a group of students sat in a circle around a cello instructor, eyes wide, bows clumsy but eager. No gold plaques. No dedications. No portraits of Julian Hart. But he didn't seem to mind. As they entered the main practice room, a hush fell over the students. Not because they recognized him, but because they saw something different in Elena's face, an urgency they weren't used to. Julian sat at one of the 3 baby grands near the back. His fingers hovered just above the keys, and he let them fall into a slow, quiet chord progression. The students stayed where they were, listening. One by one, they moved closer. Not out of reverence, out of magnetism. Elena stood beside him, her violin already out. "You ready?" she asked. Julian hesitated, just for a moment. "I haven't played in front of people in years." "You played in front of the world today," she said. "And you silenced it." He looked at her, a faint smile forming. "Your trouble." She grinned. "I prefer the term necessary disruption." They began to play. Nothing flashy, nothing rehearsed. Just a simple call and response, piano and violin, like 2 voices remembering a song they once shared in a dream. Students leaned in. Teachers stood in the doorways. It wasn't a concert. It was communion. Afterward, the room erupted into questions. Not about fame, not about money, but about how he made the notes do what they did. Julian didn't lecture. He didn't correct. He just asked, what did it feel like? One girl answered, like a memory. Another boy, no older than 12, said, like my heart was breathing. Julian just nodded. Then that's all you need. As the day wound down, and the students filed out with their instruments in hand and heart still full, Elena approached him with something wrapped in a silk cloth. "My grandmother's," she said. "She kept it her whole life. It's yours." Inside was a faded piece of handwritten sheet music. Autumn's memory. The melody he had played. The one Claire had sung on the night she died. And in the corner, in faint pencil script. "For MD, thank you for listening when no one else did." Julian's eyes clouded. "I forgot I wrote this." Elena watched him carefully. "But it never forgot you." They sat in silence for a while after that. No music. Just the weight of the moment. Then Elena spoke. "There's something else," she said. "Something I didn't tell you." He looked up. Someone commented on the video. Said their grandmother used to hum Autumn's Memory too. Said a man once gave her school a donation without leaving his name. And, she kept a photo. Julian froze. "She said she had a daughter," Elena continued. "Who had a daughter?" He didn't speak. Just stared. "Elena," he whispered. "What are you saying?" She took a breath. I think you need to call this number." She handed him a folded piece of paper. On it, a name he hadn't heard in decades. Claire's sister. Claire's daughter. Julian's fingers trembled as he held the paper. A new memory rising. A chord yet to be played. Julian stared at the name on the paper like it was a note he never thought he'd see again. A name frozen in time, Claire's sister, Claire's daughter. His hands shook as he unfolded it completely, revealing a phone number beneath the name Anna. The room around him dimmed, not from light, but from gravity. 20 years of silence pressed against his ribs. It wasn't just grief anymore, it was something else. The breathless weight of what if. "Anna," he whispered aloud. "She had a child." Elena nodded softly. "Claire was pregnant when she passed, wasn't she?" Julian closed his eyes. "I didn't know. I left before," he choked on the memory. I thought it was over. She was gone." Elena placed a hand gently on his arm. "It wasn't over. It just began differently." He paced the floor slowly, like the truth might trip him if he moved too fast. He reached for the piano bench and sat, staring at the folded paper in his palm. "How long has she known?" he asked. "I don't know," Elena admitted. But from what I could gather in the comments, she recognized the melody immediately. She heard it in the video, then asked questions. Claire's sister must have finally told her. Julian whispered, she must hate me. Elena didn't respond right away. Then she said, she watched the entire video 3 times before she posted a single word. And what she wrote wasn't angry. He turned to her. She said, I've never met my father. But if that man is him, I understand why he left. And I'm ready to hear what he has to say. Julian swallowed hard. For a man who had once played to sold-out halls, who had stood on stages in Vienna, Paris, and Tokyo, nothing had ever scared him like that sentence. He reached for his phone. His fingers hovered over the number. He didn't call. Not yet. But he saved the number under the name Anna, maybe, and placed the phone in his coat pocket. I need to think, he murmured. Elena nodded. You don't have to rush. But you don't get forever, either. He smiled faintly. You sound like her. Who? Claire, he said. She used to say that. Every time I hesitated. Julian, life's short, but regret lasts longer. Elena didn't speak again. She just gave him space. That night, Julian didn't sleep. He sat in a small apartment above the school, a space long left unused, dust-covered but still intact. He found a blanket in the old trunk, lit a single lamp, and opened his notebook. He began writing. Not a letter. Not a composition. Just, thoughts. A journal entry to a daughter he'd never met. I'm sorry I disappeared. I was lost. Not in the romantic way, just, broken. I didn't think the music in me mattered if she wasn't around to hear it. I didn't know you existed. If I had, I can't promise I would have done everything right, but I can promise I would have tried. I still want to. If you'll let me. The next morning, he finally dialed the number. 3 rings. Then a soft voice answered. Hello. Julian hesitated. Anna. A pause. Yes. He closed his eyes. My name is Julian Hart. I think I'm your father. The silence was long, but not cold. Then came a quiet breath. I was hoping it was you. His throat tightened. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything yet, she replied. Just, would you meet me? Julian's hands trembled. Yes. Where? A little cafe on 76th, noon. I'll be there. He hung up, staring at the phone like it might vanish from his hand. Elena entered the room moments later, violin case over her shoulder. Well? She asked, tentative. He looked up. I'm meeting her. Today. Elena exhaled, relieved. Good. Julian rose slowly. What if she looks at me and sees all the years I wasn't there? Elena shook her head. She won't. How do you know? Because when she sees you, she won't just see a man who disappeared. She'll see the man who played a song that found her. Julian didn't speak. He just nodded. And hours later, he stood outside the cafe. Watching. Waiting. Heart pounding in a rhythm unfamiliar yet painfully human. The door opened. A young woman stepped inside. She looked like Claire. The same eyes. The same posture. Even the way she held her coffee cup, 2 hands, gentle, like it might spill if she didn't give it her full attention. Their eyes met. Neither moved. But both knew. This was the beginning of something long overdue. And neither of them would ever be the same again. Julian stood frozen for what felt like an eternity. Anna, his daughter, was real. Not a rumor. Not a haunting possibility. A living, breathing young woman now seated just across from him, her hands wrapped tightly around a ceramic mug. She didn't flinch. She didn't smile either. Her eyes, Claire's eyes, studied him with an intensity that made him forget the cold air still clinging to his coat. He stepped forward slowly and slid into the booth across from her. The vinyl seat hissed beneath his weight. "Hi," he said, barely above a whisper. Anna took a breath. "Hi." A pause. Not awkward. Just delicate. Like they were both trying to keep a note from cracking. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said softly. "I wasn't sure I deserved to." She tilted her head slightly. "But you did. That's something." Julian nodded. His hands trembled under the table. He pressed his palms to his knees to still them. "I didn't know," he began. "Not about you. Not until yesterday." "I figured," Anna said. "If you had known, I don't think you'd have stayed away." "No. I wouldn't have." She looked down at her coffee. "I always wondered who he was. If he ever thought about me. If he even knew I existed." Julian's chest tightened. "I didn't," he said. "But I've thought about Claire every single day for 20 years. And somehow, now, I realize I've been searching for something without knowing what. That melody I played, Autumn's Memory, it wasn't just for her." Anna looked up. Her expression unreadable. "I think it was for you too," he added. Her eyes glistened. "But she didn't cry." "Not yet. I've listened to it a dozen times now," she said. "That recording from the station. It felt like something I'd known my whole life. Like I wasn't learning it, I was remembering it." Julian smiled faintly. "Claire used to hum it while she cleaned or cooked. She said it reminded her that life still had beauty, even when it hurt." "I think that's why I started playing," Anna said. "I didn't know where it came from. I just knew that when I sat at a piano, I didn't feel alone." Julian's throat closed. He blinked hard. "I missed everything," he whispered. "First steps. First words. First recitals." She didn't answer right away. When she finally did, it wasn't with resentment. Just truth. "Yes. You did. I can't undo that," he said. "No," she replied, "but you can start from now." Julian looked up, stunned. Anna reached into her satchel and pulled out a notebook, soft leather, worn at the corners, marked with coffee rings and ribbon scraps. She slid it across the table. "I write compositions," she said. "Some finished. Some not. This one. I think it's supposed to be ours." Julian opened it slowly. The first page was titled simply, "Echo." A haunting melody was sketched in pencil across the staff lines. Familiar and foreign at once. The kind of tune that begged for another voice. "You want me to help you finish it?" he asked. "I think you already started it," she said. "You just didn't know who the second pianist was." Julian let the page rest open in front of him. Then he looked at her, really looked at her. She was so much like Claire, but entirely herself. "I don't know how to be a father," he said. "Not really." Anna smiled for the first time. "I don't know how to be a daughter to a man I just met," she said. "But maybe we figure it out one note at a time." Julian reached across the table. She didn't hesitate. Their hands met, uncertain and trembling, but real. It wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be. When they finally left the cafe, the city had begun to glow in soft evening amber. The sidewalks were wet from a recent drizzle. Everything smelled like earth and electricity. They walked slowly, side by side. No pressure. No past to carry, only the steps ahead. As they turned the corner near the music school, Elena waited beneath the awning. When she saw them together, she didn't wave or speak. She just smiled. A smile that said, "Yes. This is the story that needed to be told." That night, Julian sat beside Anna at the school's grand piano. They didn't speak. He began the bass line. She layered in the melody. No cameras. No audience. Just two musicians, blood, yes, but more than that, two halves of a song, once broken by time, now slowly healing in harmony. Their piece didn't resolve. Not yet. It ended on a suspended chord. A question. An invitation. And for the first time in 20 years, Julian Hart didn't fear the silence that followed. He welcomed it. Because this time, the silence was full. Of hope. Of new beginnings. Of music still unwritten. 2 weeks passed like a quiet crescendo. Julian Hart didn't re-emerge into the public eye with fanfare. He didn't make a statement, accept interviews, or capitalize on the viral video that now had over 30 million views. He barely touched his phone. Every news outlet from NPR to Rolling Stone was begging for a quote, a performance, a soundbite. Julian gave them none. Instead, he stayed. In the chapel-turned school. In the small upstairs apartment that still smelled of old wood and memory. In the quiet presence of his daughter. Each morning, he and Anna met at the piano. Sometimes they wrote music. Sometimes they just sat, their hands resting on the keys, letting silence settle around them like morning fog. Elena would drop in, violin always slung over her shoulder, offering harmonies when needed, tea when not. They didn't chase a masterpiece. They simply played what was true. But the world kept watching. The video from the train station had taken on a life of its own. Not because it was polished, it wasn't. Not because it was flashy, it wasn't. But because it was honest. People didn't hear perfection. They heard themselves. A father grieving. A daughter forgiving. A stranger remembering how to listen. Then one day, a letter arrived. Not digital. Not email. Handwritten. From the director of a national music foundation. The letter invited Julian, and any student of his choosing, to perform at a benefit concert held annually for arts programs in underserved schools. No cameras. No contracts. Just one piano. One stage. One night. Julian didn't answer immediately. He stared at the letter for days. Folded it. Unfolded it. Left it on the piano bench, beneath the weight of Claire's old scarf. Then Anna found him there one night, still seated, unmoving. "You're thinking of saying no," she said gently. He nodded. "I don't want to lose this. The quiet. The peace." She sat beside him. "Then don't go for them." He looked at her. "Go for the kids who will never know music unless someone like you shows up," she said. A long silence passed. Then Julian reached into his pocket, unfolded the letter one more time, and said, "All right. But only if we go together." Anna smiled. "Deal." And so, on a rainy spring night, in a small auditorium filled with mismatched folding chairs and student-painted murals, Julian Hart stepped on stage. He wore no tuxedo. Just a dark shirt, slacks, and a scarf that had once belonged to his wife. Anna joined him, dressed in a soft green blouse that matched her mother's eyes. Elena stood just off stage, her violin tuned, her heart in her throat. Julian sat at the bench. No applause yet. The audience had been instructed not to clap at the beginning. Not until the music invited them. He looked at Anna. She nodded. And he began. The piece was called Benediction. A prayer, yes. But not one of desperation. One of return. Of quiet grace. Of a father and daughter writing the ending of a story that began long before either of them knew the first note. Julian's hands moved with clarity now, not because they were sure, but because they were finally free from pretending. Anna joined after the first passage, her melody light and inquisitive, layering over his chords like dawn spilling through a window. Then, in the final movement, Elena stepped forward. Her violin soared, not above them, but beside them, completing the harmony. Together, the three wove a tapestry of memory and hope. Not grand. Not thunderous. But alive. When the final note rang out, the hall remained still. Then a little girl in the third row whispered, "That's the kind of music that makes you better inside." And the audience wept. Not for sadness. For healing. Applause came only after a long, holy silence. After the performance, Julian stood backstage, hands trembling again. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was release. Anna approached him, holding a folded envelope. "What's this?" he asked. "Something I think you should read." Inside was a short note, written in a hand he hadn't seen in 20 years. Claire's. "If you ever find this, Julian, it means you found your way back to the music. And maybe, back to her. You were never meant to disappear forever. Just long enough to remember who you are without me. I'll always love you," from the space between the notes. Julian's knees nearly gave out. Anna steadied him. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The next morning, Julian returned to the school. The children were already playing in the courtyard. One girl practiced a flute solo beneath a blossoming tree. A boy hummed a melody he'd made up that morning, skipping every third note like a secret code. Inside, the baby grands sat ready. Anna waited with her composition book open. Elena tuned her violin by the window, sunlight turning her curls gold. Julian sat between them, rested his hands on the keys, and smiled. He didn't need stages anymore. Or spotlights. Or headlines. He had this. A legacy not built on applause, but on echoes. And every day they played together, another silence in the world became music again. One note at a time. Julian Hart believed his story ended when he walked away from the piano. But life had other plans. And Grace? Grace waited quietly, for a train station, for a trembling hand, for a daughter with a notebook full of unfinished songs. We all carry silences, wounds, regrets, missed moments. But like Julian, we can choose to return. To begin again. To write a new song. If this story touched you, subscribe to True Echo for more real, powerful stories that awaken the heart. Comment below, what unfinished melody are you ready to return to? And remember, even if your hands shake, play anyway. Thank you for listening.